The little girl's voice cut through the hum of shopping carts and barcode scanners like a crack of thunder. Everything in the grocery store seemed to freeze for just a second as 6-year-old Ava pointed across the checkout lanes, her tiny face suddenly pale, her wide brown eyes locked on a woman sitting alone near the customer service desk. The woman looked like she had been forgotten by the world itself. Her sweater hung loosely from her thin frame, one side of her face darkened with bruises in shades of purple and blue, and her hands trembled as she clutched a crumpled grocery list she clearly couldn't afford to fill. People passed her without a second glance. Some looked away quickly, as if her pain was something contagious. Others noticed and simply kept walking, choosing convenience over compassion. But Ava and her twin sister Lily didn't move. If you believe every story hides a lesson, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories. Sometimes the smallest moments reveal the deepest truths, and this story is one of them. Their father, Ethan Carter, was halfway through unloading cereal boxes and frozen dinners onto the conveyor belt when he noticed the sudden silence from his daughters. As a single dad, he had learned to recognize the dangerous quiet of twins. It usually meant one of two things: trouble, or something they had noticed that the rest of the world had missed. When Ethan followed their gaze, his chest tightened. The woman looked no older than 35, though grief and exhaustion had etched years into her face. Her auburn hair was tangled, falling around swollen cheeks she seemed desperate to hide. There was something haunting about the way she sat there, perfectly still, like if she moved too much, she might break apart completely. Ethan knew that look. He had worn it himself 2 years earlier, standing in the sterile white hallway of Mercy General Hospital as a doctor gently explained that his wife, Claire, wasn't coming back from surgery. One minute he had been a husband making plans for summer vacation, and the next he was a widower with 2 5-year-old daughters asking when mommy would wake up. Grief had a way of making people invisible. He remembered standing in crowded stores afterward, barely able to remember why he'd come, while people brushed past him with practiced indifference. No one saw the man silently drowning. No one noticed his trembling hands as he tried to chew cereal while wondering how to explain death to children. And now, across that grocery store, sat someone carrying that same unbearable weight. Before Ethan could say anything, Ava was already moving. Her little sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as she crossed the aisle, Lily close behind her. Ethan instinctively reached out to stop them, but something held him back. Maybe it was the determination in their tiny shoulders. Maybe it was the strange certainty that this moment belonged to them. The twins stopped in front of the woman. For a long second, she didn't look up. Then Ava slowly knelt so they were eye level. The woman lifted her face, startled, and Ethan saw fresh tears glistening in her eyes. Ava studied her carefully with the unfiltered honesty only children possess. There was no fear in her expression. No judgment, only concern. Then she did something so heartbreakingly simple that half the store would later remember it for years. She opened her arms. Lily mirrored her instantly, as though the gesture had passed silently between them. The woman stared at them, confused at first, as if she couldn't possibly believe what was being offered. Then her composure shattered. A sob escaped her lips, raw and sudden, the kind of sound pulled from the deepest part of a broken heart. She leaned forward into those tiny arms. The twins hugged her with the fierce sincerity only children can give, wrapping themselves around a stranger as if they had known her forever. And just like that, the entire atmosphere of the grocery store changed. The cashier stopped scanning items. A teenage stock clerk lowered the box he was carrying. An elderly man waiting in line quietly removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. Even Ethan stood frozen, his throat tightening as memories of Claire flooded his mind, the way she used to kneel beside the girls and tell them that people needed love most when they looked hardest to love. The woman cried into the girl's shoulders for what felt like an eternity. When she finally pulled back, she looked both shattered and lighter somehow, as though years of pain had been released in those few trembling moments. Ethan walked over slowly. That was when he noticed the small hospital wristband still clinging to her wrist. And then he understood. Her name was Rachel. Between broken breaths, she explained that she had been discharged from the hospital that morning after spending 3 nights there following an assault. Her husband, the man she had spent 10 years believing would eventually change, had finally crossed a line she could no longer survive. She had fled with almost nothing. No family nearby, no friends she could call. Just a temporary room at a shelter and enough money for a few groceries. But when her card was declined at checkout, she had been asked to step aside while she figured it out. And there she sat, humiliated and alone, while the world continued spinning around her. Until two little girls stopped. Ethan felt something crack open inside him. Without hesitation, he walked back to his cart, lifted every single item onto the belt, and quietly told the cashier to add Rachel's groceries to his total. Rachel protested through tears. Ethan simply shook his head. He didn't tell her about Claire. He didn't explain how his daughters had once been held together by the kindness of strangers after their mother died. He didn't need to. Some things are understood without words. The cashier, blinking back tears, discreetly paid for the flowers Rachel had been clutching, flowers she'd meant to place on her mother's grave that afternoon, because she had died 6 months earlier, just before Rachel found the courage to leave her marriage. Then the elderly man from line stepped forward and pressed a folded $50 bill into Rachel's hand. The teenage stock clerk offered information about his aunt's women's support center. One by one, strangers became human again. A ripple of quiet compassion spread through the store like light breaking through heavy storm clouds. And at the center of it all stood two little girls who had simply noticed someone hurting. Before we reach the end, comment below if this story touched your heart. Your words might remind someone out there that kindness still exists. 3 months later, Ethan and the twins returned to that same grocery store. As they reached the checkout lane, Ethan heard someone call his name. He turned. It was Rachel, but she looked different. The bruises were gone. Her hair was neatly tied back. Her shoulders no longer sagged beneath invisible weight. And beside her stood a little boy, maybe 4 years old, holding her hand. She smiled through shining eyes and explained that she had found work, secured an apartment, and was rebuilding her life. Then she crouched in front of Ava and Lily. From her bag, she pulled out 2 small silver butterfly necklaces. Butterflies, she explained softly, symbolized becoming. She fastened them around the twins' necks with trembling fingers. Then she told them that on the day they hugged her, she had been planning to give up entirely. Not just on groceries, not just on escape, on everything. Their embrace had interrupted the darkest thought she had ever known. It had reminded her, in the simplest possible way, that she was still visible. Still worth seeing. Still worth saving. If this story made you feel something deep inside, take a moment to like, share, and tell us what touched you most. As Ethan watched his daughters beam beneath the fluorescent lights, he thought of Claire. And for the first time in a long while, his grief didn't feel like an open wound. It felt like a thread, invisible but unbroken, stretching from the woman he had loved, through the daughters she had shaped, into the life of a stranger they had helped save. Sometimes the people we lose leave behind more than memories. Sometimes they leave behind love so deeply planted that it keeps blooming long after they're gone.